Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of you have joined our program over the years, you realize that we love to talk a lot about aging and a healthy aging process. But as you listen to most television ads and watch movies about the aging process, you realize that a lot of times what you see is America's point of view from the aging as becoming an elder, someone who's kind of put out the pasture, visited by relatives and friends from time to time. Sure, they're loved and beloved and even thought about, but for the most part, they kind of seem to be set out of the stream of what's actually happening within the dynamics of their community. On the program today, we'll be joined with Ron Pebney. He is the founder of the Center of Conscious Eldering. He's offering a new model for positive aging that focuses on potential for growth, service, fulfillment, and spiritual exploration. We're going to find out what it means to age consciously, including the importance of doing a life review and building a legacy. His new book, Conscious Living, Conscious Aging. Embrace and savor your next chapter. And I'd like to welcome Ron Pebney to the Beyond 50 radio program today. Ron, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be able to be with you today.
Well, I feel privileged that you feel privileged to be on our program today, especially with the privilege of what we're going to be talking about here. But first of all, let's talk about conscious aging itself. That seems to be something that you kind of hear in the mainstream. It's conscious this, that, or the other, but you really had a lot of thought when you put this into your book on conscious living, conscious aging.
Yes, I did. I believe that in the mainstream, most people are aging without a whole lot of consciousness, more or less drifting into becoming old without a large degree of awareness of what's going on with them, those inner dynamics inside of them, without much awareness of the potential that they have for their elder chapters to be a time of incredible fulfillment and growth and service, and without awareness of all the messages that we have around us that basically, as you said in your introduction, basically tell us that once we reach retirement age or thereabouts, we're pretty irrelevant to our society, just kind of in a holding pattern, if you will, until the end. And so much more is possible if we approach our aging with awareness, with intentionality, with consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're so right about what you talk about, too, in your book, is the fact that we have this feeling that we approach that later part of our lives. We're kind of set outside of what's actually happening within the community, so to speak. Really, the contact we have seems relatively on the surface and superficial at the same time. And, you know, there are societies around the world that really don't look at eldership like that at all, that it's much different, where it's very inclusive, is that they're respected, they're looked to, you know, so to speak. And you kind of wonder, is that something that we can even possibly change and get out of that mindset and refrain that we've had for so many years?
Well, I believe it is something that we can change, and you're definitely right. Throughout most of history, most of the world's societies have had an honored and esteemed role for the elder, a role that's been important and critical for the well-being of the society and for people as they age. Elders have always been those who have been seen as the wisdom keepers for the community, those who have that ability just as a result of many years of life experience and of commitment to their growth throughout their lives. They have that ability to see the bigger picture that younger people can't see just because of lack of years. And so it's always been elders who've been able to see and remind their societies of those values that are really critical and enduring. It's been elders who've been able to help remind their societies that when we make decisions, they're not just for today, but we have to be looking at generations to come, down to the 7th generation, to use that beautiful Native American imagery. It's been an important role, and we need that role more than ever in today's society, I believe. With the huge problems facing us, I would ask, can we afford to have tens of millions of people retire, with skill, with knowledge, with some measure of wisdom, and just become irrelevant rather than all those gifts being used to help shape the future? It's a necessary role. And I would also add one more thing, and that is that just because our society doesn't honor the role of elder doesn't mean there isn't still that inner drive, in our psyches, in our DNA, to grow into elderhood as a life stage. It's still there. It's seeking expression. And more people these days are becoming aware that, yes, there is something stirring in me, wanting me to grow into something meaningful as I age, and not just see my elder years as a holding pattern waiting to die.
Ron, I'd like to read a paragraph out of your book that I think sums up and will give the listeners a really clear idea about what we're talking about here today, if that's okay with you.
Please.
Okay, so here it is. I really enjoyed this. In fact, I wanted to start the show with this, but I thought, there's a better place for it. But anyway, what it is, it's this. The mainstream view of aging seems to hold that people with gray hair who develop some measure of elder wisdom do so simply by living many years and having many experiences. It also says that life's inevitable wounds, if they can heal, do so naturally without effort. Don't dwell on the past, many say, because there's nothing you can do to change it. We all have scars. Live as best you can now, except that idealism is for the young who haven't yet borne the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. And I think when you listen to that, and for the reader who reads that, realizes how come we went in that direction where we're just sort of to bear the pain, for instance, of regret, as though there's nothing we can do about it. And the truth is that when we think of wisdom, a lot of times, just like it says there, wisdom and experience are the same thing, when people should understand wisdom is the experience, I think, without the emotional charge. Tell us about your experience with this. I know it seems like a big mouthful there, but it's a big task for people to clearly see what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's right. Well, wisdom, as I understand it, and as I have certainly seen it in those wise elders who serve as important models for me, showing what's possible. Wisdom is very much not just about having a bunch of experiences, but about really having taken the time, made the effort to understand what these experiences have meant, and to tap these experiences for their gifts, to find wisdom in our experience. And so many of us, I believe, live pretty unconsciously. We have a bunch of experiences, but it certainly doesn't mean that ever turns into any kind of a true wisdom. Mm-hmm. Awareness is so critically important, and I think that for many of us, we live our lives with little awareness of what our experiences mean. Our experiences certainly shape us; they leave their marks on us. In many cases, these are marks that very much become old baggage that we carry around with us as we move into our older adult years. And my goodness, that baggage can hold us back so much from realizing our potential, for being able to act on our dreams, from letting our light shine, because all that baggage basically ties up energy and keeps us stuck in the past. And so such an important aspect of conscious eldering is working to transform that baggage, to get rid of it, and to do a lot of good life review, to look at our experiences and see what from the past really needs to be shed if we're going to move forward. Mm-hmm. And what from the past is wonderful. The gifts we have we have gained, the wisdom we have gained, what is it that we want to carry forward with us without bringing all the baggage with us? And if we do that, then I believe that we can serve as wise elders whose light shine brightly and who really have something to give our communities.
And it's so true, too, when you realize that, this day and age, and especially in an industrialized society, that we tend to try to either run away from or at least repress the experiences in life that we're not so happy about and celebrate the ones that we have. And you tend to see a lot of times as people are in their elder years, they'll reflect on the positive experiences with a sense of pride as though they won't have experiences that will seem as positive as they move through life. And what you describe in your book, too, is how energized or how much energy it takes to actually do a lot of that introspection and that inner work, that at this stage is really necessary. This is the quiet time to go in, as you said, and to take a look at maybe the regrets and heal those and the emotional scars and just basically the things that we have from living, and really take a look at, just basically cultivating that to really live more of our potential rather than just saying, well, that time is behind me now.
That's right. It does take some energy. It takes some commitment. But I think so many of us don't realize how much of our energy and that potential energy for moving forward is tied up with stuff that from the past that hasn't been healed, hasn't been transformed. And if we expend some energy, step outside our comfort zones a bit to do what I call the inner work of conscious eldering, it is amazing how much energy is going to be freed up, much more than we have to expend in doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm kind of curious because there was one interesting question that I see here from the producer, and I thought I might throw this out there because you can almost see what could be a negative view from someone who's young. It's almost as though the youth try to run from the fact that, that they'll age. But for some reason, we have this message out there in our culture that always talks about anti-aging, healthy aging, reverse aging. We need to do something about this as though it's a disease. And I think what's so vital about what you talk about in your book is this. The reason I think those terms exist is that we really truly have lost the rite of passage, those initiations that we need. For instance, I remember graduating from high school. Somehow I was simply into adulthood, and as a child growing up, I always wondered, when do I cross that threshold to know that I'm an adult? And even in my 20s and into my 30s, I still kind of scratched my head thinking, I don't remember when I crossed that line, if I ever did, and all of a sudden now I'm talked with and I'm in conversations with adults as an adult and respected as an adult, but I never really felt like I crossed that sort of invisible line. You know what I mean? And that's something I've talked about a lot on this show, is about rites of passage. Very important stuff there.
And that's been one of the huge losses, Daniel, in contemporary society. It probably began with the advent of the industrial age. As we meaning culture, became more and more removed from and in many cases alienated from the natural world with all of its natural rhythms and cycles, we became more and more alienated and removed from the natural processes within ourselves. The processes, the rhythms and cycles of the natural world are ours. We're not somehow different, but we've forgotten that. And in the natural world, it certainly is the case that there are endings, and those endings are necessary for new beginnings. And there's always some kind of an in-between time after the ending where the seeds are being prepared for the new beginning. And we've forgotten that. And so we work on some kind of a model where we just move from one thing to another without recognition that we have to let go of certain elements of the past. As we move into adulthood, young people have to let go of certain aspects of who they have been, and they have to do it consciously. Mm-hmm. And they need time to prepare, with the help of wise elders for becoming aware of what the next chapter is and help in moving into that chapter. And this is true for all the major transitions in our lives, and unfortunately our society has forgotten that, and that is a huge loss. But and I'm glad to hear that you say you talk about Rites of Passage frequently on your show. There are many people who are coming back to the recognition of what we need to do to move in a healthy way through life transitions and to reconnect with our own rhythms and cycles and those of nature. And there's a whole Rite of Passage movement that has sprouted up in this country in recent years, and it's really strong now in Europe. It's trying to reclaim that essential human wisdom. And so I'm really encouraged by it, and I would say that what we do with our conscious eldering work and the retreats and workshops we offer and in this book is to try to help people see that if we're going to experience what's possible for us as we age, then we need to get in touch again with these inner rhythms and cycles, and we need to get in touch again with those dynamics of life passages. And so we try to help people to get in touch with and embrace those.
It's funny what you write in your book. It's actually something from another book that you were talking about, and that is about nature, is that there is a new disorder now known as nature deficit disorder.
Yes.
And I find that funny because there was a time some years back where we took out, it was my wife's 2 teenage children, out to this really interesting park with a lot of very unique trees and little trails that you walk through, and it was funny watching them because the son seemed to tag along with the daughter, and she seemed to walk through it with her arms crossed with just the dirtiest look. Like, what a waste of time, this all is. I'd rather be sitting on my cell phone in a bedroom somewhere, which we made her leave that actually in the car or something like that. And then, the whole attitude, well, it was nothing but a bunch of trees. And I'm thinking, really, you really kind of missed the boat here. And you realize that when people, I'm thinking of one interesting movie was, I think it was Indian Summer, starring Alan Arkin, and he's a camp counselor, running a real camp, actually, summer camp, up in the woods of southern Canada. But anyway, he said it was finally time for him to let the camp go, and they wondered why, as he was telling them. The reason is, a child that comes up here wearing those headphones, I just can't understand a child like that anymore. You're out in the woods and you need to be bringing your stereo with you, so to speak. And that we disconnected so much from nature as though that's an object and in many ways to be conquered, rather than just enjoyed for what it really is.
That's right. And it is in my opinion, and apparently yours, that is a very sad state of affairs. But I think that is where parents have such a big responsibility, and where I think elders, especially, true elders who really see grandparenting as not just something they do, but an important expression of their elder gifts. This is where we can help the young people when they're really young, by getting them out into nature, by helping them to see our own joy and to see how we come alive and to see how much we appreciate nature, and to understand how much our very well-being depends upon nature's well-being. And if we do this with the young'uns when they are very young, then I believe and trust that we can help them to find a healthy balance where they have a healthy, strong relationship to the natural world, as well as being able to utilize the technology that is an inevitable part of our lives. It's going to be up to us to model this for them. to get them out there.
And it's fascinating, too, again, as I was mentioning earlier in the program, is our attitudes about aging. It's something that we need to fight against, and I wish sometimes in America we would change our messages about, those sort of things. It seems everything is a fight and everything is out to get us, including aging.
Yeah, that's right.
And I remember a time, my daughter had asked me how old I was, and I remember I was in my early 30s, and I said probably something like 32 years old. She says, "Oh my God, that's old, Dad. You should be dead by now." And I thought, are you kidding me? That's the view you have of somebody in their 30s? Really? When you realize that the life expectancy now has changed to be, 72 and a half years old. It's amazing to think if you have that many years, what your potential could truly be if you could just remove that and continue to move forward, as you say, to consciously age.
That's right. Incredible potential. It's a whole view of life that sees life as a continual growth and personal evolving and ripening all the way up until the day that we're on our deathbed, which is what I believe, and many of those wiser than me believe, is what life is and should be. Mm-hmm. And not something where we go up until we get to about 60, and then all of a sudden everything basically stops, and we're just kind of waiting there, kind of trying desperately to hold on to who we have been. It's a whole different model for what aging can be. Mm-hmm. And more and more people are beginning to embrace it. And I think there are many more, especially of us baby boomers, who may not understand, maybe have not been exposed to any of this, but who do feel just a certain discomfort, ill at ease, that something's missing, that it just isn't right, that we somehow retire or get to retirement age and then it's over. And I certainly see, I believe that my book, which is one of many fine works out there, there are more and more. I'm one of many teachers out there. I believe we're really on the cutting edge of a whole shift in how at least large segments of our culture think about aging. The time is right, and certainly the baby boomers, who have always been on the vanguard of cultural change, are going to be propelling this healthy change in aging.
Yeah, so that way the young can realize that's something to look forward to. And in fact, I had a specific guest where I had actually interviewed him on 2 different shows that I had done because I was really surprised myself. He created a book called Creative Aging, or The Creative Age, excuse me. And as I read this book, I realized how inspiring it was to realize most of real creativity begins to awaken by the time somebody reaches age 45 and older. And that most of, for instance, great breakthroughs in history have occurred mostly in people's 50s and 60s. And you take a look at some stories of how some people started multi-million-dollar businesses in their 80s. And you realize, what in the hell are we so caught up with this idea that, okay, you work for this company for X amount of years, and that idea of loyalty now we all know has been destroyed or forgotten, so don't ever become loyal to a company unless it's your own. But that being said, once you're done, then you just go out to an old folks' home and you just sit there and watch TV and play bridge. And I think, that is not the way I certainly want to find myself in the elder years.
And I would build on what you just said, Daniel. The purpose of the first half of life, according to Carl Jung and so many others, is really to establish an identity, a strong, effective personality and ego that can accomplish things in the world. First half of life very much is about being oriented toward action and doing and outer expression. And the second half of life, then there's a natural call or a natural pull in all of us to become more reflective, to begin to develop our inner lives, which include, in a big way, our creativity. Mm-hmm. As we begin to shift some focus from outer doing to more inner being, for many of us, that allows our creativity to begin to emerge. And you're certainly right. So many of those that I consider true wise elder models in my life are people who are incredibly creative at this point in life. Mm-hmm. For myself, for whatever I can be a model for, I was never able to write a book until I reached the point I'm at now, and I'm 66 now. That creativity, that inspiration, that sense that I actually have some wisdom that wants to come out of me or flow through me, that didn't emerge until I got into my 60s. And that's true for so many of us, but I would add that these things don't emerge just because we reach a certain age and get some gray hair and wrinkles. Mm-hmm. They emerge because we allow them to, because we believe these things are possible, because we've done some of the inner work to clear out the blockages. They emerge because we're ready and open to them, and we cultivate their expression. They don't just happen for most people. And so conscious eldering is so much about bringing intentionality along with belief that more is possible than we thought. And when we do that, wonderful things can emerge.
Now, you suggest that for the listeners out there who think, this sounds so refreshing and inspiring at the same time, that generally people, at least as you talk about in the book, are about in their late 50s to early 60s is about the best time to really start doing the work that's necessary, the sort of a rite of passage into eldership, if you will. Mm-hmm. And you say, if it gets later than that, it gets a lot harder just because it truly does take a lot of energy. I realized, for instance, when I had, call it my spiritual awakening, at least my path, and this was back in my early 20s, that all these years later, there are some things that I know now that I only understood then. Mm-hmm. There's a real difference when people say, well, I understand that, but there's a difference between understanding and knowing something. For instance, meditation. Back then, my particular spiritual practice suggested meditation is what you need to do, and there were all these mystical stories surrounding all these enlightened events with people. And I thought I wanted that for myself, but realized, so I'm sitting here and I'm breathing in and out, and I'm doing this 5 or 10 minutes a day, but I don't get it. I understand I'm supposed to do it, but I don't get it. Years later, I realized, they kept talking about how it calms the mind and puts you into the now moment. Now I know what that is and realized, geez, I wished I would have stuck with it back then, but it took a lot of energy, A, to make changes that are necessary or that you feel are necessary, and B, the energy that it takes knowing that a lot of times it's because you're brushing away a lot of beliefs that you have created up until that point.
Yeah, that's right. And as you just stated, this inner work is an unfolding process. It takes time. It takes, in so many ways, it takes creating a lifestyle that supports being conscious, and supports growth. And that's not something you do overnight, or it's not something where you go to some retreat or workshop and all of a sudden you're there. Mm-hmm. And we all know how hard it is to change old habits and old beliefs. It takes a long time. And that's why if we begin this work in our 50s and make this work of becoming conscious and cleaning up the past and deepening our connection with that source of guidance within ourselves, if we make this a part of our lives starting in our 50s, then we're going to be so much further ahead and further along when we get into our 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. But if we wait until then, as you said, we may just not have the energy, we may not have the health, even if we do have energy and health, we're not nearly going to accomplish as much as if we begin this work earlier. Mm-hmm. And so, I oftentimes hear from people who say, "Oh, I'm not old, I'm not elder. When I get really old, I'll start doing this." Yeah, right. You may or you may not. And either way, if you've started when you're 50, think how much further along you're going to be than if you start when you're 75 or 80.
And really, too, you could start much earlier than that. Would you agree?
Yeah, and in so many ways. Somebody asked me yesterday, they said, well, what you say in the book about conscious living and conscious aging, that's applicable at any age in life. And I say, yeah.
Well, I realize
it's a way of living.
Yeah, I wanted really our listeners to understand, if they're sitting there listening, and believe me, we actually have listeners of all ages, and it surprises me how a lot of times they're younger. They're 18 to 29. People are really surprised, well, I'm not 50, and I said, well, our show is about that, but it's also about more than that. And it's applicable to everybody. Aging is something we all face because each day brings a new day forward to whatever that linear result is of being older. And, that as they listen, they realize, I never thought about taking my life in this direction. And what I encourage the listeners to know about this book is, first of all, you were very thoughtful in putting it together. Even the producer, when it came across the desk, said, Tommy, this isn't generic like a lot of other stuff that's out there, because we get a lot of that kind of stuff. And I said, no, this is really something people should read. It's a very easy read, but a profound one. At the same time, and if nothing more, they'll enjoy the story by the fire things that you have throughout the book of people who have actually went through this process and shared their reflections and experiences about what it is to actually co-participate in this process.
And I think that's one of the real strengths of my book. And as I was trying to conceive of, what might this book look like, when I was first envisioning it, it became clear to me that I think we all know the power of story. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that I don't have enough stories, and I don't remember enough stories from powerful experiences people have had in our retreats, that I thought, what if I put out a call and ask those who've been on our retreats who might be willing to submit a story of how some conscious eldering practice or understanding really somehow made an important difference in their lives. I was expecting a few stories, and I ended up getting 40. And so it was a wonderful process of sorting through 40 wonderful stories and picking those that could best, I think, amplify certain points and bring the book to life. And so I hope that readers will be as excited as I am to read these stories from these 12 or 13 wonderful people who told their quote-unquote story by the fire.
Now, was there a particular one that stood out or resonated with you more than others?
Oh, my goodness.
I know that's a tall order, but sometimes there's that one that vibrates in such a way where you realize, this is someone that connects with me through experience, for whatever reason that is.
I guess rather than telling a specific story, because I'd really have to spend a little bit of time reviewing them.
We don't request that you need to.
No,
either.
But what I would say though is that in several of these stories, a major theme is presented. Each in the person's unique way, and that theme is coming to realize, and in most of these cases, it's when people were spending time in solitude in nature, which is so powerful and so healing and so opening of heart and mind, of coming to realize that the way they had been viewing their lives and those painful experiences, those regrets, those woundings, those screw-ups, that rather than something that is shameful and something that was a big negative in their lives, when they had these aha moments when they came to realize, whoa, that was really an important part of my growth, of my unfolding, of my becoming who I am now. And without those experiences, I wouldn't have the wisdom now and the compassion and maybe wouldn't have developed some of the gifts that I now have. And several of these stories touch on that theme of so much of how our lives develop, I think, depends upon the stories we tell ourselves. And just imagine, and this would happen for various of these people, all of a sudden they get in touch in an experiential way with what it is to view our lives as a hero's journey, rather than just as a bunch of events that wound us and bring us down and whatever. And so that is a theme that I think will inspire people as they read some of these stories. And I would just again say that most of these stories are what happened to people when they got out and tapped the power of the natural world. Somehow getting outside of human-made walls into nature opens us up to realizing the most incredible things about ourselves and everything that we're connected to. So that's a roundabout way of answering your question, but I hope that it's perhaps a bit helpful.
Well, it brings up, too, I think, which is a way that people should also take a look at. When we're up there in the later years, you say, we've tumbled, we've made these mistakes. Sometimes we hold a lot of deep regret wishing we had made other choices. Sometimes there's the regret that we didn't make a choice and take an action in the first place. And, as you said, when you go out in nature, there's an interesting way in reflection that you can come to see these things as though you get to see it from a grander point of view, as you mentioned earlier in the book. First you have a mouse's view, and you can only see what's in front of you, and then there's the eagle view that takes it all in. And that's the opportunity, especially as we age, to do that very thing, to kind of step back in the overall picture and say, that really wasn't as bad as I thought it was then, And even though perhaps in the beginning of the program I might have seemed like America's this sinister place, and I don't mean to intend that at all. In fact, it's just the way we seem to view it in a commercial way that creates the kind of beliefs around aging that don't seem so favorable. And just recently, and this is where I'm going to snap back and show how America is a great place, as I had interviewed Dave Berg, who was the former producer of The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And one of the interesting things is Jay Leno was a real pioneer in one area, and that was the mea culpa. When he had that episode where Hugh Grant came on after being caught with a prostitute, and he literally comes on the show and he says, I just screwed up, and I'm sorry, And he was literally saying, I'm human, and I'm going to trip and I'm going to fall. That particular incident up before that show just about stopped his career cold. And it was because he was willing to step up and accept 100% responsibility that America showed what America truly is by saying, well, we forgive you, just move on with it. We're all like this. And that you get second chances in America as long as you're willing to own up to the responsibility of it. And that's in society. And you're saying, hey, let's take it out and listen to what the trees have to say. So if we can be forgiven in a society that sometimes promotes an anti-aging message, we can certainly realize that taking it out to the woods might be just that much greater in our healing and our path to spiritual awakening, if you will.
That's right. And there's something about taking it out to the woods that for most of us, it helps us to open our hearts a bit and our minds, and it helps many people along that path of self-forgiveness. Because I think most of us, I'll bet it's true of most of your listeners, would probably say that the biggest challenges relating to forgiveness have to do with forgiving ourselves. rather than forgiving others or having others forgive us. We're so cruel to ourselves at times, and the more we can open our hearts to ourselves, we see that carrying around this stuff is just toxic to us. We need to let it go. And we do have second chances. We have as many chances as we need, but we have to be willing to believe that we deserve them, and we have to be willing to take them.
It's, again, I can't say enough how enjoyable reading your book was. It made me realize, okay, great, I've been on a sort of this path for a long time, and I never thought of it as an aging or rite of passage toward aging, and realizing there's so much more to do. And I think that's what I really want, our listeners out there to know is start embracing the fact this is happening. So you really now have a choice. How do you want to become? Do you want to become like that bitter person nobody can stand to be around, or that person that lights up the room as soon as they show up just because they are that beacon, if you will? And you talk about that in the book as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I have known some of those incredible beacons who have lost their physical abilities. They've lost their physical health. It's not like they're able to do a lot in the world, but they radiate something that does indeed, as you're saying, really deeply touch people. Mm-hmm. I'd like to just go back to one point you made earlier in this interview, if I can, Daniel.
Sure.
And that's that you talked about, there's, anti-aging and positive aging and healthy aging and all these things. And I guess I view them with mixed feelings. On one hand, I see so many of them as denial of our mortality, and the kind of denial that will keep us from ever really realizing the fruits of that natural unfolding that happens in us, that includes a chapter called Elder, as I understand it, with all of its possibilities and its inner dynamics. And so to the extent that these anti-aging and healthy aging and stuff is just designed to help us pretend we're 40 until we become 80, I see them as negatives.
Right.
But the positive is that if we can embrace what we can learn about health and about keeping our bodies strong, and a lot of the wonderful wisdom in those, embrace that, and also understand that that we are growing and evolving, and that this health and this energy can serve to help us really shine as conscious elders, rather than just help us continue to hold on as long as possible to who we used to be. Then to that extent, all of these are important elements of a larger paradigm shift, and I honor them all. It's just what we choose to do with them.
Mm-hmm. I know there is one practice that's known as the Death Lodge practice. Tell us about that one.
I think the Death Lodge practice is one of the most powerful practices that people find on our retreats, and we offer week-long Choosing Conscious Elderhood retreats at retreat centers around the country. And I think it's maybe the most powerful practice in the book. Mm-hmm. And in effect, I guess, long story short, the inspiration for it comes from a practice that I learned was employed by some of the Plains Native American people in this country. And when a person up there in years felt that his or her days were coming to an end, after handling their physical affairs, the disposition of their belongings and things, they would go to a lodge or a teepee on the edge of the village, and they'd go in there, and they would basically use it to bring completion to their lives. And they would spend time reviewing their lives, how they have lived them, the contributions they had made, so they could feel good about their lives. They would spend time focusing on their relationship with their Maker. And then individuals would come one at a time people who had been important in their lives, to the death lodge to have that final conversation with the one who is dying. And from the perspective of being about to die, things can look very different. And so if forgiveness needed to happen, it could happen. If expressions of gratitude and love needed to happen, whatever needed to happen for completion. And once these conversations were over, then the person felt ready to pass to whatever comes next. And so we use that as a model for a powerful practice that we can do in our conscious eldering, not just one time, but it's more of an ongoing practice where we create for us, some place, preferably outdoors, where we do our death lodge work, and we do life completion work, and we do it with the attitude, keeping in mind that we may soon die. Mm-hmm. And then we bring in spirit people for whom we need to really bring completion, and we have those conversations in there with their spirits. And some of the most powerful things happen in the way of forgiveness and other expressions. And we do some of our own inner work, reviewing our lives and looking at how we could change some of the stories that we've carried that have been so hurtful into stories of growth. And as a practice, it can really help us to clear out old baggage, to finish unfinished business, so that we can indeed go through that death from midlife adulthood into elderhood without baggage. And it also helps to clear up our relationships with the past. So if we, when the time comes that we are to leave this physical body, we can be more and more up to date rather than carrying a whole lot of stuff to our deathbed. Mm-hmm. So it's a very powerful practice.
Well, I can see how it would be, especially when you realize that many seem to try to find any way they can to avoid death, and it's something we all face. It's got a 100% immertation rate, I guess.
That's right.
But I also find that in as much as people seem to fear death, and that we're told that we need to somehow change that belief to where we embrace the fact that death will happen, I think people more often fear living. And there's so much evidence to support that I think people more often fear being alive than they do being dead. And I'm sure in your experience, as I was listening to you share about the Death Lodge practice, that you've probably seen that quite a bit, or a different point of view in that way.
That's right. I think a lot of us fear living, because true living, as I think those of us who are at all conscious know, involves stepping into unknown territory. It involves letting go of things, letting go of comfort and security. And my goodness, I would imagine you've experienced, Daniel, as I certainly have, that all those times when I have been most alive are those times when I have had to take risk, mm-hmm. when I've had to step beyond what I thought was possible to put myself in some new situation. And in those cases, I have truly come alive. So the more we can embrace a practice of allowing it to be okay to step out of our comfort zones, allowing it be okay to have fear but to act anyway, the more we can do that, the more we're going to truly be alive at any stage in life. And certainly as we begin to face some of the losses and diminishments that are going to be an inevitable part of our aging. Mm-hmm. And we can either be resilient and just choose to allow ourselves to grieve and then look for new possibilities, or we can remain stuck in grief and loss and never reach out and never move beyond that. And we really do have a choice.
Mm-hmm. I'm reminded again of the movie I mentioned earlier, which was Indian Summer, and there happened to be one of the campers, and this is a group of adult campers that were there as children in the golden years of this camp, and she was grieving from the loss of her husband, and so she was up there hopefully trying to unwind and basically see about getting her life back and kind of let go of the grieving process. And there was a point where she was at a cabin looking out on the lake, and of course the Alan Arkin character, the camp counselor, comes up and was talking about how he had given the deep six to this one gentleman that was part of the camp many years ago, and how the wife after that wonderful ceremony, the deep six meaning they buried him out in the lake, just the deep six if you want to call it that, and he says, for the next 15 years, she just basically stayed here at the cabin waiting to die. We should have just thrown her in the same day.
Yeah.
And there's 15 years there that you could have been a much different person. But again, going back to the suggestion that I think we fear life more often than we fear death, is just that very thing. We're afraid of letting go of old beliefs that really don't serve or work for us anymore, but we believe somehow we're supposed to hold on to them, or when that loved one dies, that was the only one we're ever going to have, so I'm just going to keep myself by myself. And it's amazing, the choices that we could be making and the power in those choices. And again, I think if there was more rite of passage so that we can understand that each step in life is a change and it is different, but how buoyant do you want to be, that we wouldn't probably age in the ways where we become that worst instead of the best at that point.
That's right. And I you express that beautifully, and I guess I would just add one thing in closing, and that is that many people seem to believe that, aging just brings out the pettiness and cynicism and, brings out the worst in people. What a misconception. The truth, I believe, and I've certainly seen in so many people, is that aging accentuates who we have become.
Mm-hmm.
And if who we have become is petty and cynical and bitter, it's going to get accentuated as we don't have the energy to suppress the negative stuff that we had when we were younger. Mm-hmm. And if we have become as somebody who is clear and energy and light and spirit shine through us, then as we get older, that's what's going to get accentuated, and that's what those around us are going to experience, and that's our gift to the world.
Now, I know that you have a lot of wonderful retreats, as you say. They're usually a week long, where people can see about conscious aging and eldering, if you will, which is really the big theme here. What is the website people can go to where they can find out when and where these retreats do occur?
Now, they can go to www.centerforconsciouseldering. centerforconsciouseldering.com.
Okay.
I know that's a lot, but if you take the time to type it in, I trust that you'll find a website that offers some inspiration and a sense of what's possible, as well as having information about my book, which is being released today, by the way, and about our retreats and workshops for next year.
And just so we can really lend some clarity for our listeners out there, specifically, what is this retreat for?
They are week-long retreats that we call them Choosing Conscious Elderhood.
Okay.
And their purpose is to give people a sense of what it's possible, how it's possible to age consciously, to give people experience of practices that can enable them to do that, to give people experience of the three-stage dynamics of Rites of Passage, because we kind of build the retreat around those dynamics, and to give people plenty of time, including a 24-hour period of solitude where they can deeply connect with the natural world. And one more thing, experience of deep community, because so much of what people learn And what touches them on these retreats, they learn from each other as we open our hearts to each other and share what is true, and the challenges, the joys, the visions, the dreams. They are rich experiences for people.
I can imagine they would be, and there's nothing more enjoyable than to take that back into a community and let people know, look, you're in for a wonderful ride if you could just let go of, again, some of those beliefs that just don't serve us. For instance, the fear of death or the fear of life. Get rid of that stuff and see what your potential is, because it's a pretty inspiring ride.
Yeah, that's right. Daniel, I thank you so much for this opportunity. I very much enjoyed this conversation with you. I do have another interview coming up in just a couple minutes, so I'm going to have to.
We understand
bid
that.
You adieu.
That's why I was having to give out the website at the top of the hour. Again, it's centerforconsciousliving.com.
No, Center for Conscious Eldering.
Eldering, my mistake there. centerforconsciouseldering.com. Again, the book is Conscious Living, Conscious Aging, and Ron Pebney. Thank you for being on the program, and that's actually the same thing the Creative Age guys said. Hey, I need to get going. It's like, I'm aware. Yeah. I know what time it is.
Well, I've very much enjoyed this. I've enjoyed your reflections and your questions, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you again for joining us.
And goodbye.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Maybe you can catch Ron on the next show there, but certainly you can find out more from going to the centerforconsciouseldering.com, and you can find out more. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, live your day past halfway.